Namaskar, good morning, and a very warm welcome to all of you on this panel on debating the Asian century. This is Sonu Trivedi who would be moderating the session today. Let me begin by saying that no region in the world today is more dynamic than Asia. Across the continent, the countries of the region has emerged as growth engines, lifting hundreds and millions of people out of poverty. And not only this region is known for the economic strength, but the strategic importance of the region can also be not underestimated. And it is because of this that Asia has emerged as one of the major players in the world politics. And to discuss this issue, we have some of the finest minds with us here today. And they will be speaking and debating on the issue of the Asian century, preordained or prematured. The debate about the Asian century, whether it is preordained or prematured, aims to examine the challenges of global and regional governance in the rapidly evolving domestic political and social context in the region. Let me introduce the panel to you all today. We have with us Dr. Teen Le Din, who is the Acting Director General of Institute for Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies at Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. We also have with us Ms. Kim Mai Tran, who is the Research Associate at Center for Strategic and International Studies at Washington, D.C. And the final speaker that we have here today is Ms. Darya Grivkova, who is from Moscow, an expert at Foresight Center, Institute of Statistical Studies and Economics of Knowledge at Moscow. And before I open the floor for discussion, let me briefly give you a background about the panel that we are discussing here today. With the emerging geopolitics of the uh, in the emerging geopolitics and the global realities, the regional architecture has been transformed in a big way. There has been a shift in the global politics from transatlantic to Indo-Pacific, and the countries of the Indo-Pacific are poised to shape the trajectory of Asian century. And here we must acknowledge that we are all living in an Asian century, as the 19th century was dominated by Europe, 20th century by United States. We all should take Asian century as the reality of the 21st century. And let me briefly highlight three very important factors that needs to be taken into consideration when we are talking about the Asian century. The first one, which I need to highlight, is the role of global actors, particularly the role of United States in the region. The second most important factor that I would like to highlight here is the role of two giant neighbors of Asia, India and China, the world's largest democracy and the world's largest communist state. And the third important factor, which I would like to highlight here, is the role of regional powers, particularly countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and the middle powers like Vietnam, Indonesia, and also the role of the smaller island states in the region. So, with this background, I would like to open the panel, and I would like to invite Mr. Tin Le Din from Vietnam to speak on this very, very important theme of the Asian century. And the most important question which I would like to pose here is about whether Asia can lead the new global order. Mr. Tin, your take on this.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to join this very distinguished panel and have the opportunity to speak to the Dhaka Global Dialogue this time. This is a very important time for us to think about how we can build a global order and a regional order that is good for peace and stability and prosperity for our region. So I think the discussion is very timely to talk about the Asian century, which is, I think, a very interesting term coined by scholars to talk about the importance of the Asia Pacific or now the Indo Pacific. I think we can be optimistic having the region as the pioneer in both economic development and as a contributor to peace and stability in the region and elsewhere. So now Asia accounts for more than 60% of world population, more than 60% of the world GDP, And if we look at the economic growth rate of the region right now, people have a reason to believe that that in the decades to come, Asia will be prosperous in the socio-economic development. I would also argue that because the presence of many major powers and other entities in the region, such as major powers in ASEAN and other countries, we can be confident that this is the Asian century, particularly, like I said, in the social economic development. But also, that leads me to another point I think also significant to mention. So, when we talk about the Asian century, it's not just the sense of pride or the sense of belonging, but also a sense of responsibility. So I think we should discuss it a little bit more when we look forward having the region as one of the a very big stakeholder and player in world politics and world economy right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tin. Let me go to our second panelist, Ms. Kim. Now, we'd like to hear your response on whether Asia can lead the new global order.
Thank you. I think it's a really interesting question, and I think in order to answer it properly, we should reflect a little bit on the meaning of century and take a historical step back. What was the world like a century ago in 1919? Europe was in disarray. It just came out of the First World War. Treaty of Versailles was signed. We're amidst the Russian Civil War. China was only an emerging actor, and so was the US. And I think big thinkers at the time probably didn't imagine that the United States and China would enter a strategic competition 100 years later. And I think these are important factors to take into account, meaning the uncertainty and unpredictability of history. And I do think that the fact is clear. The strategic and economic focus is shifting to Asia. Um, and I think we see that in the US very well. For example, senior leaders in the Pentagon used to value a background in Europe, and now it's very much a background in Asia that's valued. But I do think that it it is the Asian century, but it also is Asia's to lose. I think countries in Asia need to be wary of the rise of populism, big infrastructure deficits, education gaps, a lack of financial inclusion, gender equality, and all of these challenges risk undermining the natural advantage that Asia has at the moment. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for raising these issues. Now, I would like to move to Ms. Darya. Your take on whether Asia can lead the new global order.
Okay, thank you. First of all, let me say that I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to express my opinion. I would like to stress one of the most important, from my point of view, feature of this region. I'm absolutely sure that the Asia is a very specific world with many civilizations, with their own political traditions, different economic orders, ways of development. But and of course, some contradictions among countries. But despite all these differences and diversity, Asia has an undeniable advantage. It's a perception of this reality, this diversity, and ability to work together to challenge common issues and cooperate, try to try to make respectful and profitable cooperation. And that's why I think that Asia can lead the new global order in terms of being a model, being a pattern, being an example for other countries. We have a term rule setter. I think Asian region can be kind of model set or something like that. all countries of the Indo-Pacific region are driven by the idea of economic prosperity of its nations, and mm, it's economic breakthrough that brings Asia at the center of the world arena. But I'm pretty sure that no country can develop without peace and security. And acceptance of this um, reality allows Asian countries to push aside their contradictions, at least for some extent. Um, it's like, yes, we are different. Yes, we have some contradictions, but also we have much more dangerous issues outside and inside our borders, including piracy, drugs, illegal trafficking, terrorism, extremism, climate problems, and so on and so forth. So let's work together. Let's make the situation in the region more predictable, at least. And I repeat that such an approach allow Asia to be a leader in terms of being a model. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daria, for your very, very interesting inputs. Now, let me go back to the first speaker, Mr. Teen Lei. You talked about some sense of responsibility when you were introducing the theme. And could you please slightly elaborate on that particular issue?
So to kind of to elaborate on the responsibility that the Asia of our region has to take, I have to acknowledge and share with many of the points that made by our two panelists here about the challenges, the contradictions, the differences, the problems that are facing the Asia Pacific and the Indo Pacific. So these conditions and differences and problems, according to my perspective, has to be managed. We have no better way than adopting a proactive posture when it comes to solving these issues. If we fail to do so, if we are not up to the expectation of our own region and then beyond, I think we might be in a situation where the all the economic development can be undone. So and threatening to peace and stability in the region. So I think we have the institutional support to do that. So one of the aspect I'm thinking is the role played by ASEAN as the organization that play a central role in the evolving security architecture that works for peace, stability, and prosperity in our region. So I think as an honest broker, as an honest mediator, ASEAN can provide a venue and a forum and a medium for all the stakeholders to come together and discuss issues discernible to everybody in the region. And the fact that ASEAN has existed and developed over the last 5 decades is a strong testament to its relevancy to our region. So ASEAN is a very typical example I'm thinking about here, and I think the spirit of multilateralism, the spirit of law, are still prevalent, even though we are challenged from different sides. But the need to build a rules-based order is still there and acknowledged by all the countries in the region. And the fact that we need to resort to peaceful means to settle our differences are still there. So I'm very optimistic, and I wish that the region can be forward looking and embarking on the positive things that we have done over the last decade and continue to do so, and with the role of ASEAN being accentuated further. So that's my take on the Asian responsibility.
Thank you. Now, coming to you, Ms. Kim, you talked about certain challenges. So, given the asymmetries of the Asian countries and the uncertainties facing the global security order, the fault lines in Asia, and the major flashpoints, how do you think the Asian countries are going to manage these contestations and contradictions that we have present today?
Yeah, I just want to, as the only participants from the US, go back to a point that you made in terms of destabilizing actors in the region. And I think increasingly the US and China is seen as actors and that are destabilizing the 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 region. And I think for the US, it's quite a new thing, and it's obviously linked to the Trump presidency. And I think the fact that the United States is no longer a certain ally and one that will back up ASEAN and show up to major ASEAN events is an issue. Going back to your question, um, I think there are major challenges faced by Asia, and but I do want to maybe float a controversial idea, and um, and that is, you know, we might be think we could think of the 21st century as one that doesn't really pay that much attention to geography. Um, it may the actors that may define the century are actors that hold the economic and technology power. It's not necessarily a country, but we've talked. A panelist yesterday talked about the end of the Westphalian Order, and I think that's very much a possibility. Um, but Asia and Asian actors are still very much leading in the tech realm, for example. India and China and even Southeast Asia are very much important actors in that realm and are raising considerable amounts of funding. And I also think that to face these challenges, Asia has built very strong institutions. ASEAN is extremely robust. It has also its own challenges, but it's maintained a cohesive and robust cooperation for the last decades. And I think trade agreements like RCEP could be really, really helpful as well.
Thank you. And quickly, let me go back to Ms. Darya. We would like to hear your response about how Asia is prepared to manage its contradictions given the challenges that we have in the region.
Yes, thank you.
Quickly, in just 1 minute.
Yes, actually, my answer to this question comes from the previous one. I have mentioned already that economic prosperity is a priority here, but actually, sometimes we can see that some long-standing issues appear when it seems to be settled. For some extent, at least, just take a look at the relationship between Japan and South Korea now, and current trade war between them. To be honest, I'm not sure that Asia absolutely and perfectly prepared to manage its contradiction, because I think that this region is in the process of transition now. The Asia Pacific concept gives way to Indo-Pacific, and it means that we will have to deal with a huge region with a lot of actors with their own aspirations. And more actors, less chances to find mutually acceptable solutions, to find compromises. And I think that the Indo-Pacific region is much more complicated and sophisticated than Asia-Pacific. And let me ask you, for example, will India or Bangladesh or Bhutan or any other country of South Asia, for example, concern about the destiny of Senkaku Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea? I'm not sure, and it's okay, because these countries have their own urgent concerns. But I think I repeat that readiness of Asian countries depend on its ability to perceive situation, to perceive reality and their differences, and in this term to be a model, a leader. I think one of the most brightest example how to manage this contradiction, it's countries of Southeast Asia. But the question is how to broaden this model to the other region. Thank you.
Thank you, Darya, for your response. And let me sum up the major inputs that these panelists have given today. We all, I hope, agree that the region is in transition, but there is a great hope in the institutional framework, particularly the institution of ASEAN, as it has been raised by Mr. Thin and also reiterated by Ms. Kim. And also I hope we all agree, as it was pointed out by Ms. Kim, about the role of how the countries are managing their economic issues, and how economic power and technological power is going to shape the trajectory of Asian century. On this note, let me thank all the panelists for your inputs, and I hope this session was an enriching one, and the discussion about the Asian century will go beyond the four walls of this room, and certainly it would be carried forward in other forums. Thank you.